At 4:03 p.m., our CEO stared at an empty chair. At 7:19, my manager posted a picture of a cocktail with the caption, "New Beginnings." I'm the only reason those two timestamps are tied together. And if you stick with me, you'll understand why I've been sitting on screenshots that could end a career. The day started like a funeral. No one wanted to attend. My boss, the director of our department, was officially transitioning out. It wasn't a surprise. We'd all known for weeks. But this was the exit meeting, the one where every loose end needed to be tied. Vendor contracts signed, compliance attestations submitted, shared passwords transferred. It wasn't just ceremonial. Without that handover, half the company's infrastructure would be frozen. My manager, Melissa, had been assigned to lead it. She'd made sure everyone knew that this was her stage, her responsibility, her proof of leadership. Except when the time came, the chair with her nameplate was empty. At first, nobody spoke. The CEO's eyes flicked down the conference table, then to legal, then back to the chair. It was the kind of silence that hums in your teeth. Finally, the CEO said, "Where's Melissa?" Everyone looked at me. I wasn't supposed to be there to present. My job was to support, maybe answer technical questions. But Melissa had a pattern: swoop in, smile, take credit for the work, and leave. I thought maybe she was running late, stuck in traffic. So I checked my phone. Nothing. No Slack messages, no emails, not even a ghosted barb. Just nothing. The CEO sighed. "We can't wait. Let's start." So I did. I walked through the vendor checklist, answering questions I hadn't been prepped for. I opened the password vault and explained redundancies I'd built months ago but never got credit for. I fielded legal's questions about a SOC2 report Melissa had promised to finalize but hadn't. The whole time, I felt like I was tap dancing on broken glass. My hands were steady, but my heart was pounding hard enough that I thought the mic would pick it up. By the end of the 2-hour session, the CEO nodded once and said, "Good work. Not ideal circumstances, but we'll adjust." Then everyone filed out. The chair beside me was still empty. I wanted to be angry, but mostly I was exhausted. I shut my laptop, packed my notes, and checked my phone again. That's when I saw it. An Instagram story. Melissa on a rooftop bar, a drink in her hand. The caption read, "Cheers to new beginnings. Geotag, downtown, less than a mile from the office." My thumb hovered over the screen. I almost let it pass, but something felt off. I tapped to replay. The glass in her hand reflected the skyline, reflected, and more. Behind her, barely visible in the window, was a man I recognized. Not a coworker, not a friend. A partner from a rival firm sitting across from her, leaning over a leather folio with a logo I knew too well. I hit record. Saved the whole story to my phone. My pulse jumped. It wasn't just that she'd skipped the most important meeting of our department's year. It wasn't just that she'd lied. It was what she was doing instead. And I realized then that empty chair wasn't an accident. I used to think Melissa was just careless, the kind of manager who floated through meetings, repeated whatever buzzword she'd overheard in the hallway, and then left the rest of us to scramble. But that rooftop story, the reflection of that man, the folio with the logo, changed the way I saw everything she'd done in the last 6 months. Because it wasn't just carelessness. It was sabotage, dressed as leadership. Take the SOC2 report. For weeks, Melissa had told our boss she was wrapping it up. She even snapped at me once in front of the team. "Stop overcomplicating it. Be efficient, not thorough." Efficient, not thorough. That was her mantra. Meanwhile, I'd seen the gaps. Vendor certifications expired. Key compliance checks marked pending with no follow-up. I tried to escalate it, but she intercepted the emails and told me to stay in my lane. Or the transition checklist. The director had assigned it to her directly, but half the entries were in my handwriting. Password vault entries, vendor contacts, process notes. Melissa would call me into her office, sigh theatrically, and say, "Can you just draft this part? I'll polish it." Then she'd copy-paste my work into her leadership updates. When credit was on the line, she smiled. When blame was possible, she vanished. And that exit meeting, God, that was supposed to be her chance to prove she was the one to lead after our boss left. She wanted that recognition, the visibility. She told anyone who would listen that she was basically running the department already. Except when it counted, she left me alone in front of the CEO and legal. That meeting felt like standing on a fault line during an earthquake. The CEO kept glancing at the empty chair like it would suddenly fill itself. Legal's counsel pressed me on policies Melissa had promised to resolve. I could feel my shirt sticking to my back, my voice thinning out. But I kept answering, one question at a time. I showed them the backups I'd made, the vendor contacts I'd documented, the redundancies Melissa hadn't even known existed. When the CEO closed his folder and said, "Good work, not ideal circumstances, but we'll adjust," I almost laughed out loud, not because it felt like praise, but because it was proof. Proof that the entire scaffolding Melissa had built was empty, and I'd been the one holding it up all along. I thought maybe she'd call, text, at least send an excuse. But no. By the time I packed up, the silence was deafening. That's why the rooftop story hit so hard. The photo wasn't glamorous, just a cocktail glass catching the fading light, her manicured hand raised like a toast. But the details screamed louder than the caption. The geotag was for a rooftop bar owned by one of our biggest clients. In the reflection, just barely visible, was a man whose face I knew from LinkedIn and from whispered conversations, a partner at a direct competitor. And then there was the folio, dark leather, stamped with silver initials, the initials of that same client. A folio that, by policy, should never leave their office, let alone end up at a bar table across from our manager and a rival. I stared at that frame until the timer ran out. Then I hit record. Screen captured the story, frame by frame, until it was mine. At first, I didn't know what to do with it. I tucked the files into a private folder, labeled something boring, and told myself I was being paranoid. Maybe it wasn't what it looked like. Maybe it was nothing. But the next morning, the cracks showed. The credential vault failed because Melissa hadn't completed the pass-off. Vendor renewals were flagged as overdue. Our compliance dashboard flashed red. The CEO was livid. Emails poured in, "Why weren't these ready? Who signed off? Melissa?" Melissa wasn't in the office. Instead, she popped up on Slack with a chirpy message. "Morning all, noticing some delays. Can we make sure these are handled?" Handled. By me. I sat there staring at her message, my hand still on the phone that held the rooftop photo. I could already see the playbook. She'd pin the chaos on me, position herself as the fixer, and walk away smelling like roses. Except this time, I wasn't empty-handed. When HR emailed me for context, my pulse spiked. They wanted to get ahead of questions about yesterday's exit meeting. They asked if I could walk them through what happened. I typed a reply, factual, time-stamped, neutral. I told them when Melissa didn't show, when I covered, when I handed over documents. Then they asked, "Do you have anything else relevant we should be aware of?" My thumb hovered over the attachment button, and I thought about the reflection, the folio, the caption, the timing. I attached the screenshots, hit send, and leaned back, heart hammering, because once that left my inbox, there was no taking it back. I didn't hear anything for hours after I sent those screenshots to HR. My inbox stayed quiet, Slack was dead, except for random chatter, and the office buzzed like a beehive where every bee was pretending nothing was wrong. But my stomach knew something was coming. At 10:42 a.m., I got a calendar invite. Subject line, follow-up, exit meeting context. Attendees, HR rep, legal liaison, CFO, not Melissa. No. When I joined, the HR manager's face was set in that flat, unreadable expression people use when they don't want you to guess where things are headed. "Thank you for providing additional context yesterday," she said. "We're reviewing some things, and I'd like to confirm a timeline with you." So I walked them through it, again. What time the meeting started, who was present, what documents I provided, when Melissa failed to appear, when the CEO asked me to take over. I didn't embellish, I didn't editorialize. I stuck to timestamps, file names, Slack history. Then legal pulled something up on their screen. My stomach dropped when I saw it. The rooftop story. Melissa's hand, the cocktail, the caption, new beginnings. Legal zoomed in. Do you see what we're seeing here? I nodded slowly. The reflection, the rival firm partner, the client's leather folio on the table. The CFO leaned in. That's their logo. That's a client document. HR asked if I'd altered or edited the screenshots. I shook my head. They said, "Okay. Thank you. Please don't discuss this outside this room while we review." And that was it. Meeting over. No reactions. No verdicts. Just silence and a heavy knot in my chest. But I didn't have to wait long. By lunch, Melissa was back on Slack, firing off messages like machine gun fire. Where's the updated vendor sheet? Why wasn't this flagged sooner? We need to own this before leadership thinks we dropped the ball. She even pinged me directly. Can you draft a note for the CEO apologizing for the delays? Frame it as us catching things late, but getting ahead now. Us. I stared at her message and felt heat crawling up my neck. I knew what she was doing. She wanted me to confess to the very gaps she'd created. She wanted me to polish her mess into an apology she could deliver as if she'd discovered it herself. Instead, I did nothing. At 2 p.m., she BCC'd the executive team on an email claiming the junior staff failed to provide updated vendor attestations before yesterday's exit session. She CC'd me like a dagger slid under the ribs. 10 minutes later, IT sent an email blast. We are investigating unusual access delays related to password vault handover. Please refrain from making changes until notified. Another 10 minutes later, HR messaged me directly. Please do not respond to Melissa's email. We'll handle communications. By 3:30, word had leaked. People were whispering in the halls. Someone muttered, "Did you see the card charges?" I didn't know what they meant until 4:15, when a finance analyst stopped by my desk and whispered, "Melissa expensed the rooftop bar. Corporate card, last night, 7:22 p.m. My jaw clenched so hard it hurt. They had her. The story's timestamp, the corporate card charge, the ride receipt from the bar to a rival firm's HQ, the reflection of the client folio. Every breadcrumb was lining up, and none of them pointed at me. At 5:02 p.m., HR called another meeting. This time Melissa was invited. When I logged in, her camera was on. She looked irritated, like someone inconvenienced by traffic. She launched into a monologue about miscommunications, about how she'd entrusted certain handover tasks to me and how I'd dropped the ball. Then legal interrupted. "Melissa, can you account for your location yesterday between 3:30 and 6:30 p.m.? Her smile froze. She tried to laugh it off. "I was working remotely, prepping." The CFO clicked a file. The rooftop receipt appeared on screen. Melissa's corporate card. Timestamp, 7:22 p.m. Silence. Then legal dropped the screenshots. The story. The reflection. The folio. Melissa blinked. For the first time, I saw panic flicker. The HR manager's voice was calm, almost bored. "Melissa, we'll need to continue this offline. Thank you, everyone." The call ended. I just sat there, staring at my screen, my hands trembling. For months, she'd made me feel small, disposable, invisible. And in one afternoon, the receipts spoke louder than her entire facade. Melissa didn't come into the office the next day. Her Slack status stayed on active, little green dot glowing like she was plugged in, but she wasn't answering. Not emails, not calls, not even the casual morning chatter in our team channel. Instead, she went on offense. By 9:17 a.m., a new email landed. Subject line, clarifying yesterday's misunderstandings. BCC'd to the executive team, CC'd to me. It read like a carefully sharpened knife. She claimed she had delegated essential tasks to staff who failed to complete them on time. She framed the rooftop outing as a client engagement within standard business practice. She even implied the screenshots were taken out of context by someone with incomplete knowledge of the scope of my responsibilities. In other words, I was the scapegoat, except this time I wasn't alone. At 10:02 a.m., IT circulated a memo. Device location history from corporate laptops showed Melissa logged into Wi-Fi at the rooftop bar from 3:58 to 7:11 p.m. The exit meeting had started at 4 Ms. At 10:30, legal shared an internal note. The leather folio visible in Melissa's story belonged to our largest client, confirmed by a serial tag seen in the reflection. It should never have left their office. By 11:00, finance matched the rooftop bar charge on Melissa's corporate card to a receipt time-stamped exactly 7:22 p.m., the same minute she posted the New Beginnings caption. And by noon, the CFO connected the dots no one wanted to say out loud. The man in the reflection was a partner at a direct competitor, one currently bidding on the same contract we were transitioning. That wasn't client engagement. That was a breach. The temperature in the office shifted. People who'd once parroted Melissa's buzzwords now avoided her name altogether. The executive floor was sealed off, HR moving like ghosts from office to office. At 1:15, Melissa reappeared on Slack. A flurry of messages, short, sharp, defensive. These are misinterpretations. I have decades of experience. I wouldn't jeopardize client trust. We need to focus on continuity, not witch hunts. She even DM'd me, "You and I need to present a united front here. Trust me." I didn't reply. At 2 p.m., an all-hands invite hit my calendar. Temporary coverage and transition planning. Melissa wasn't listed as a presenter. The CEO opened the call, jaw set tight. We're in a challenging moment. Our priority is ensuring stability for our clients and continuity for our teams. Then he turned to me. "My name? I understand you've already been covering these processes. We'd like you to continue overseeing the transition for the next 72 hours. Melissa unmuted herself, voice sharp. "Excuse me? This is highly irregular. I am the manager of record." The CFO's reply was ice. "Not anymore." The call ended with new reporting lines, new responsibilities, mine, and a stunned silence from Melissa's square, frozen mid-blink. By 4, the whispers had turned into certainty. Legal was preparing a for-cause case. That meant not just termination, but clawbacks, lost bonuses, even possible non-compete enforcement. And for the first time in months, my inbox was quiet. Not because chaos wasn't brewing, but because the storm had finally shifted away from me. I sat there watching the cursor blink, thinking about how Melissa always told me to be efficient, not thorough. Funny, it was my thoroughness, the receipts, the backups, the quiet notes that had just buried her. The next 72 hours felt like living in someone else's skin. 1 minute, I was the person taking notes in meetings, quietly fixing things before anyone noticed, the invisible pair of hands behind Melissa's leadership. The next minute, I was the one executives were calling directly, my inbox filled with subject lines that had never had my name on them before. Client continuity questions, transition status update, please confirm access. And Melissa, she was unraveling in real time. Day 1, she sent a 5-paragraph email accusing me of inexperience and mismanaging expectations. HR intercepted it before it reached leadership. Day 2, she tried to scrub her Instagram story. Too late. Legal already had the downloads, complete with metadata. Day 3, she started pinging old allies, directors in other departments, even a VP, framing herself as the victim of a smear campaign. One of those directors forwarded me her message with a single line. "Don't worry. People know the truth." Meanwhile, audit had begun pulling every thread. And when you pull threads, you find more than you bargained for. They found that Melissa had marked completed on compliance training she never actually attended. They found that 2 vendor rush fees she approved were paid to an LLC owned by a college friend. They found that she'd backdated approvals to make herself look proactive. And then came the rooftop meeting. Legal confirmed that the folio visible in the photo contained NDA-protected documents. IT confirmed that Melissa had shared files with her personal email around the same time. The competitor connection wasn't just suspicion, it was logged. The CEO's face, when he addressed us in a closed-door meeting, told me everything. Melissa wasn't just being let go. She was being terminated for cause. That meant no severance, no retention bonus, no graceful LinkedIn announcement. Everything she thought she'd secured vanished in a clause buried deep in her contract. The kicker? That forfeited retention bonus, the 6-figure carrot our boss had set aside for leadership, was redistributed, not to Melissa, not to her allies, but to the team who had actually executed the transition. We woke up one morning to see extra numbers in our bank accounts. I stared at mine for a long time. Not because of the money, but because it felt like proof. Proof that being thorough had value. Proof that someone had finally noticed. Melissa tried one last play. She emailed the CEO directly, claiming extenuating circumstances, hinting at personal issues. But by then, HR had the receipts. The investigation file was over 100 pages, screenshots and timestamps lined up like dominoes. The CEO didn't even reply. By the end of the week, Melissa's access was revoked. Her name disappeared from org charts. Her office door stayed closed. And me? I was sitting in meetings I'd never been invited to before. The department head, our old boss, still finishing his final week, stopped by my desk. He put a hand on the back of my chair, looked at me with a kind of weary pride, and said, "You kept the ship afloat. Don't forget that." That night, for the first time in months, I left the office before dark. I walked past Melissa's empty office, lights off, and felt something settle in my chest. Not triumph, not gloating, just a deep, quiet relief. Because the truth is, revenge hadn't come from me raising my voice, or plotting behind her back, or even sending those screenshots. Revenge had come from paperwork, from timestamps, from the thoroughness she mocked every chance she got. 3 weeks later, the department looked different. The chaos had ebbed into routine, the constant buzz of panic replaced with something almost unfamiliar, calm. I was still technically interim, but in practice, I was the one holding the pen. The vendors came to me directly now. Legal copied me on compliance threads. Even the CEO asked me in passing, "How's it looking on your side?" That question, your side, stuck with me. For years, I hadn't had a side. I'd just been the invisible scaffolding holding someone else's shine. Melissa's name was gone from the directory, from the org chart, from Slack. The investigation had concluded. Termination for cause. Her retention bonus was clawed back, her non-compete activated, and legal issued a quiet directive that barred her from contacting our clients for 2 years. The client whose folio appeared in her Instagram story, they cut her off completely. The competitors she'd cozied up to, they backed away too. No one wants a liability with screenshots in circulation. She'd tried to spin it online, of course. A vague LinkedIn post about moving on to exciting new opportunities. But anyone who looked closer could see the silence under it. No likes from colleagues, no comments from leadership, just an empty cheerleading echo chamber of strangers. Meanwhile, the rest of us got our slice of her forfeited bonus. A redistribution the CFO called an acknowledgement of who actually did the work. It wasn't just money, it was validation, a line under the story that said, "We saw what happened and we know who carried it." But the most satisfying moment came quietly, without fanfare. The final transition meeting, the one Melissa had skipped, had to be rescheduled. This time, I was the one presenting. No empty chairs, no scrambling, no pretending. Just me, legal, the CEO, and the client on the other end of the line. I opened the vault, walked through every credential, signed every document. On time, thorough, complete. When it ended, the CEO leaned back in his chair and said, "That's how it should have gone the first time. Well done." I left the building with the sun still high, the air warm against my face. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was carrying the weight of someone else's failures. Instead of heading home, I walked a few blocks, past the glass towers and crowded sidewalks, until I reached a familiar rooftop bar, the same one from Melissa's story. I ordered a club soda, sat by the window. The skyline gleamed against the glass, just like it had in her photo. I pulled out my phone, not to record, not to screenshot, but to sign the last DocuSign of the transition. One tap, and it was done. I raised my glass to no one in particular and thought, she wanted new beginnings. Turns out they were mine.